Want a huge deal on a large pizza? For a very limited time at Donato's, buy any large pizza and add a large one-topping pizza for 50% off. Yes, half off. Use promo code HALF. Donato's, gotta love more.
The Sports Desk at the Columbus Dispatch presents the BuckeyeXtra Basketball Podcast. With your host, Ohio State basketball beat writer Adam Jardy.
Brandon Matisse says, "Give me the rock." Here it goes. Up and away. Slam jam bam. And now he does a little dance.
Now, the BuckeyeXtra Basketball Podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Adam Jardy from the Columbus Dispatch. Today is Wednesday, March 25th, 2026. It's my official duty to welcome you into episode 547 of the BuckeyeXtra Men's Basketball Podcast. Welcome to Jubilation City. Welcome to our first podcast in almost a week. We're here in the middle of the offseason. Sweet 16 will get underway here, and I'm here in Columbus just trying to take stock of where things stand for Ohio State men's basketball as we are now almost a full week into the offseason. It's that weird time of the year where I'm doing a podcast right now. It is entirely possible that within 5 hours I will have to record another one because we might have something newsworthy to talk about. But we're sitting here on a Wednesday afternoon where really nothing has happened for Ohio State men's basketball. Nothing concrete, no players in the portal, no players back, no even like cryptic posts about whatever. Like it's just the whole process is just kind of getting underway for Ohio State men's basketball. Since they got back to Columbus, they've started, having sort of quote unquote exit interviews with guys and conversations about what might be next for them, what should be next for them. These things aren't often as cut and dry as like you go in, hey, you should transfer. All right, I'm out. Like there's usually more nuance to this. Certainly in the NIL era that has, changed how some of these conversations go as well. And sometimes it starts with, first of all, do you want to come back? Start there. And then if you want to come back, well, then what does that look like financially? And then let's talk about how does this all fit together and what does a role look like? Like there's it's a lot more nuanced. And I think it's more nuanced on a yearly basis as far as just trying to gauge where all this is going and who wants to do what. And so I'm not going to go super long on this one. Mostly just want to sort of mark time and acknowledge that this is where we are on the calendar and that we don't have a lot in the way of concrete information at this moment about who will be back, who won't be back, and all that. But we have some general ideas, I think, on where a couple of things are headed, what these next couple of weeks might look like for Ohio State. And we're gonna talk about all that here in a moment. We did have the final radio show of the year for Ohio State coach Jake Diebler. That was on Monday. We got some more talk about that last possession against TCU, which certainly continues to draw conversation and some examination from fans who certainly can look at some of the other late game situations we've seen in the NCAA tournament and teams that have gotten better shots than Ohio State, teams that have, like Florida, not gotten a shot at all. Like certainly a bit of a mixed bag as you've watched these first two rounds of the tournament. But it was really interesting to hear Diebler walk through the decisions that were made, why they called the play that they did, how that play didn't quite work according to plan, and how ultimately, that wasn't the shot that they wanted in that moment. And it is worth pointing out because there was confusion about this postgame. And I don't remember if we got into this on the previous episode or not, but Ohio State did have a timeout to use. There was some confusion, and admittedly, I was a little confused because in the postgame interview that we had with Jake Diebler, he talked about like still having a timeout and did they want to use it? They talked about whether they would use it, and the stat tracker showed that they were out of timeouts. The TV broadcast showed that they were out of timeouts. But what we've learned is that, it certainly looked like they used their final timeout because as soon as Xavier Edmonds scored with about 4.5 seconds left, every player on that court called timeout. What we've learned is that there was an official timeout to check the clock, and that became enough of a timeout. They didn't have to use their last timeout, so that allowed Ohio State to still have one in the pocket. And had the Buckeyes gotten across half court, entirely possible they would have used one. Now, one of the things that was most interesting to me about like how that worked out was that the number one thing they were looking for, or one of the most important things, was they wanted to get the ball in the hands of their best player with a head of steam behind him. Like they wanted the ball in Thornton's hands going up the court with some speed. And what is interesting, the longer that you watch that clip and the more you really analyze it, is he never really fully accelerates. And there wasn't quite the pace, I guess, maybe that you would need in that moment. And certainly like TCU's defense, had something to do with that. And the way the play unfolded, but it just didn't seem like what they drew up was what they ended up executing. And it's a tough way for a season to end, certainly. And an even more difficult way, I think, for the Bruce Thornton era to end, where, the last image we're going to have of him is unable to get across midcourt in 4.5 seconds and having to take a half court shot that doesn't fall. Like that's a tough way for that era to end. But that is, as Dealer has talked about, like that's the play that they use. That's the play they run. That's something they had practiced extensively. That's why they had that specific play call, and they've had success with it in other situations. They didn't in this one. And I understand the notion of like, we should have drawn up something else, but like you lead with your fastball, you go with getting the ball in the hands of your best player. And ultimately it just didn't work. It didn't work out on that play. And that was sort of the big takeaway from the radio show as far as like how it went down. I wrote a second story I've written about that sequence. You can go online and you can read about that. And Diebler was like, here's a quote. This wasn't in the story, but this was on the radio show. He said, you reflect back as a coach when an end of game situation doesn't go right. In my mind, it's what did I need to do differently? Was I sloppy drawing up on the board? He said, that's why I ran something we were comfortable with. Ultimately, it didn't work out. Now, that's really like the biggest, I thought, like newsworthy thing that came out of that. Now, there was some talk about the roster and retention and things like that, and we'll dive into that here in just a second. Before we do, I want to remind you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you enjoy your favorite podcasts. If you subscribe, you'll automatically get the newest ones just as soon as our man Patrick Flaherty, the Podfather, can grab them and publish them for us. While you're subscribing or downloading, please leave a review, please click 5 stars, and please consider telling a friend. Thanks to all of you who have taken the time to do all those things. Donato's is legendary for putting so many toppings on their pizzas, but just wait till you hear what they're taking off. For a very limited time, when you buy any large Donato's pizza, you can add a large one-topping pizza for 50% off. That's right, half off. You order using promo code HALF. Order your favorite large Donato's pizza and add a large one-topping pizza for half off today. Donato's, gotta love more. And stay tuned, because I'm sure there's going to be, the podcast will not be able to be scheduled with any sort of regularity at this moment. I mean, I'll at least come to you once a week. But as news happens, we will have more reasons to podcast. So stay tuned, because this roster as it is won't be the roster that we see next year at Ohio State. And that's really the big question right now, right? The big, who's coming back, who's not. And it's worth pointing out that as of 2:26 p.m. on Wednesday, March 25th, we don't have any official word from anybody. We do know the guys who will not be back, and we know the incoming freshmen. In between, it's just a big question mark right now. So dates to keep in mind. The transfer portal opens April 7th, and it closes on April 21st. So from a technical standpoint, players cannot enter the portal until the 7th, and technically schools cannot contact players in the portal until the 7th. Now, I think we can all look each other in the eye and acknowledge that ain't how this is going to go down. And certainly you're already seeing players are announcing their intentions to enter the portal. And yes, they are being contacted by schools everywhere, even though the rule says what it says. I don't know there's a great way to do this, honestly. I prefer this method over what we had last year, where the NCAA tournament field was announced on Sunday, the portal opened Monday. Instead of us being able to enjoy brackets and March Madness and the start of all that, we're being inundated with hundreds of players entering the portal. Like, that sucked. Nobody liked that. So at least give me this version of that. But I don't necessarily expect that we're going to be waiting until March 7th to finally learn, like, well, who's coming and who's going. I mean, for all I know, it could be today. We could get news on 1, 2, 3, 4 players. I mean, we'll see ultimately how many Buckeyes end up leaving. I would guess at like 4 into the portal, maybe at this point. But it's also like you see the domino effect where maybe somebody's decision to stay or go then juggles somebody else loose or keeps somebody that ordinarily wouldn't have been planning to leave, or certainly a portal addition can impact that as well. So we know that Ohio State will not have Puff Johnson, Brandon Knoll, Christoph Tilley, and Bruce Thornton back. Those guys are gone. And we know that Anthony Thompson and Alex Smith will be freshmen next season. Otherwise, you go down the list, you've got Amari Bynum has 3 years left. Tayson Chapman has 2 years left. Gabe Cupps has 2 years left. Matthew Griachich has either 3 or 4, depending on if he gets a medical redshirt for this season. Miles Hero has 4 years left. John Mobley Jr. has 2 years left. Braylon Nash has 2 years left. Ivan Yagovin, 2 years left. Josh Ojanwuna, 1 year left. Devin Royal, 1 year left. And Colin White, 2 years left. So there's all those parts, all those pieces, and no one's really said anything yet. And I've got my roster tracker that's up on dispatch.com for every player. The only guy that I didn't talk to was Braylon Nash. But I got everybody else, like at least a quote from everybody else about what their thoughts are on next year, what they might be planning to do next year. And everything's non-committal from everybody. And that's just the world now. That's what college basketball is. So we don't really have like a great public, I'm definitely coming back, or I'm getting the heck out of it. Like, there's none of that other than, I should say, like Josh Ojanwuna in the Big Ten tournament. He said, I'm coming back for sure. I'll be back. Yep. So I see him at Ohio State next year. Other than that, like on the radio show, Jake Diebler talked about how that their first focus is retention, and then where do we go in the portal to raise our level. He said there's a lot of good happening behind the scenes to set us up to be successful from a roster construction standpoint. It's been a battle to get to this point, but I'm excited about the progress we've made. And he said we're in a much better place today than we were this time last year when it comes to building our roster. Again, we're starting with retention. Like he did talk a lot about retention. It seems at this point that retention probably begins with the two guys who went to the podium after the loss to TCU in the NCAA tournament, John Mobley and Amari Bynum. Those two guys certainly were the flashiest, biggest, big-time consistent contributors, I feel, certainly down the stretch of the season. You know, it is kind of wild. Like, only two guys played in every game this season, Bruce Thornton and Amari Bynum. And John Mobley Jr. as the second leading scorer on the team, one of the most prolific three-point shooting seasons in the history of the program. There's a lot there. And I think that when you talk about retention, I think it probably starts with those guys. And then the next one, obviously, in that conversation is Devin Royal. And I think Devin is probably the most interesting one here because certainly there was the position change this year. He statistically was about on par with where he was last year. He took more threes and he made more threes. 2-point percentage went down. Rebounding went down. It seemed like the offense was favoring Junie and Amari to an extent as the season went on. Amari seemed a little bit more able to get his own shot or to go make something happen as opposed to Devin at times. And Devin certainly had battled a couple of things this season, was famously sick for that Michigan State game, unable to play. That's going to be an interesting situation there because clearly that's a guy who's been at Ohio State for 3 years and was on the leadership group that led this team last year. Clearly was valued within that locker room, and was respected in that locker room. So what does he want to do for a fourth year? Does he come back? Does he want to find somewhere else? I think that's going to be an interesting one to monitor, I think, as we sit here and we start looking at this roster. He kind of feels like probably the biggest, like, high profile wild card, I think, because I think it seems like Mobley is likely to be back. It seems like Bynum's likely to be back. I don't know that it feels the same with Devin, but he is a Central Ohio guy who's been at Ohio State for 3 years, and we'll see. Again, we don't have any concrete information on any of this stuff just yet, and as the portal eventually opens and as players start to enter it would appear at this point that Ohio State's looking for a lead guard, and I think Ohio State needs to be aggressive and needs to bring in not just a dude, but like a. This sounds really cliche. Don't roll your eyes at me, but like they don't just need to bring in like a dude at the point. They need to bring in a dog. Like you need someone who's going to go out there and like if you talk about a starting lineup with John Mobley, Amari Bynum, Anthony Thompson, and then Josh Ojonwuna, or insert, I think, the next priority, which is another center. You start with, like, I don't know if the starting five for next season is on this roster or not, but I do feel very confident saying that the starting one is not on this roster currently. So that has to be, I feel like, the top priority, because there is certainly some high-level talent that you are just looking to plug in a point guard and have them help run things. Like it's tough to like even envision exactly what that player looks like, and we'll see what kind of guards end up entering the portal. But I think that's you want to go out and you've got to hit on someone who's going to be a high-level contributor. Like, can Ohio State go out and land an all-conference player via the portal? Like, that's going to be really, I think, as big a question for this offseason as anything. They have to get the point guard portal situation. They got to nail that. And I think from there, certainly you're looking, it's hard to imagine, like Josh Ojonwuna said he's back. It's hard for me to imagine like Ivan Yagovin not being back. And I think he's in that mix. He's in that rotation. But like, I always think about Morez Johnson. Like, can you get a Morez Johnson? And maybe Josh Ojonwuna is Morez Johnson. We just don't know because he hasn't played in more than a year. But I think, boy, if you can get somebody like that, like what a difference that would make on this team as they get ready for Big Ten play next year. After meetings with players and after kind of sorting some of that stuff out, then yes, there are meetings with coaching staff. And is it possible that we see some changes there as well? Yes, that is a possibility. None of these decisions will be made in a vacuum. Like each one of these could impact the next one and then potentially the next one. As discussed on the radio, like I keep hearing there are more resources available than there were last year. So I think the biggest critical component then is making sure that you are using them at the optimal level and bringing in impact type of players who can both supplement and compete with the top level talent on your roster. And we'll see what that looks like. We'll see what kind of players they start to get linked to. I think certainly knowing like what sort of financial situation you're in now is helpful. It allows you to be more aggressive, I would say probably early, and have a better feel for how this could go and like what sort of parameters you're working with. Like all that stuff should help. Now we'll see who ends up being out there and who else is looking for the same type of thing and what Ohio State can do to win that kind of battle. That's going to be, I think, one of the biggest question marks as this team enters the offseason. And last thing for now is the other thing I've gotten some questions about is like, are they going to hire a GM? Is there going to be someone on the staff that's going to be charged with overseeing the roster and things like that? And I mean, my initial understanding of that situation is that it's most likely if they do have a quote unquote GM, it will be something to the effect of like a former player or somebody like that who can help with fundraising and making phone calls and being like a public face of that. I would expect right now, again, subject to change, that's the direction that position would go, if that is in fact something that does get added to the mix. We'll see. Like I said, it's kind of a weird podcast to do right now because we frankly don't have a ton in the way of concrete information, and I really don't love to engage in a whole lot of speculation. Hamilton taught me that that's a really bad thing. So that's all we know for right now. When we know more, there will be more podcasts. There will be all the videos and content and all the things coming your way. But I wanted to at least like mark time right now and acknowledge kind of where we are, and certainly wish everyone the best as we all look at our brackets and get ready here for the Sweet 16. I mentioned previously that because I'm a dummy, there are 2 different Beat the Beat Writer brackets or bracket challenges right now. In the one that is supposed to be the main one, I'm currently sitting 34th in that bracket challenge, and that's being led by Eric Evans, who has 55 points. He's picked Duke to win it all. And then in the other one, so Eric has 55 points. In the other Beat the Beat Writer, which is labeled Beat the Beat Writer 25 or 2025, Henry Meese also has 55 points, and he had Michigan winning the whole thing. So I will keep tabs on both of these to determine who the winner is, and I apologize for the confusion. I will figure out what I can do next year to make sure that doesn't happen. But yes, we do have 2 separate bracket challenges going on at the same time, and that's my bad. I'll tap my chest. That's on me. We'll be better next year. Now, as always, you can send along your questions, your comments, your love notes, your hate mail, and otherwise constructive criticism to me at Adam Jardy on Twitter or ajardydispatch.com. Thank you again for listening. Thanks to Patrick Flaherty for putting up with this. I'll be back with you, I'm sure, soon. So until then, be kind, take care, and we'll talk soon. Donato's is legendary for putting so much on their pizzas, but just listen to what they're taking off. Right now, buy any large pizza and add a large 1-topping pizza for half off. Use promo code HALF. Donato's, gotta love more.
Be sure and subscribe to the Buckeye Extra podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.